Hello, everyone. This is Don Miller from Concept Searching. Today, we have a wonderful webinar for you. Today's webinar is on migration and really how we get content into SharePoint and hopefully how we get in alignment with our corporate policies. With me today, I am honored to have two guests. First one, Val Orikoff, Chief Architect at Portal Solutions. I've worked with Val for, I don't know, I think it's probably about 5 or 6 years now. Val, are you on the line?
Yes, I am, Don. Hello, everybody.
Excellent. Excellent. Next person, Michael Conrath, who also works on the services team for Portal Solutions, who I'm getting to know. But first, Michael, are you there?
I am here. Hello, Don.
Excellent. Again, my name's Don Miller, and I run sales for North America here for Concept Searching. I've been in this space for about 10 years, focusing on metadata and aligning metadata with the enterprise. That can be for governance, that can be for search, that can be for migration. And so I definitely seen metadata really improve migration projects. However, I would like to actually introduce our guests because I think they have a great background that aligns with the presentation that we're going to provide today. So with that said, Val, could I get you to provide a little background about yourself, and then you, Michael, and then Michael, if you could actually go ahead and kick it off and provide a little background about Portal Solutions, and then begin our webinar.
Sure. Thank you, Don. I've actually been involved with SharePoint implementations going back to probably the end of 2003. That's the year of. Probably, yes, that was the first one through which we've actually done a lot of new work implementing solutions. And obviously, over all those years, one key aspect that kept coming back every time was the question of how to migrate existing SharePoint installations and roll them forward, which is probably why I was invited to speak today. That goes to say, Mike, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Val. My name is Mike Conrath, and I'm the Director of Implementation Services at Portal Solutions. I've been working with SharePoint not quite as long as Val, but for about 7 years now. I run most of our implementation projects at Portal, and many of those do involve migration, as Val stated, somewhere or the other. Even if a project isn't a dedicated migration project, there's always a component that involves getting your content into that solution that we built for you. So I have quite a bit of experience doing these types of projects and kind of look forward to sharing some best practices with you guys going forward.
Excellent. So, like I said, everyone, we should have a great webinar today on migration. And what we're going to try and do is show a little bit of how we get metadata onto the content, potentially how the content moves, and really what we're going to show on our side is the tool that actually is responsible for that migration. We call that taxonomy workflow. And so with that said, let's set the ground floor. If you do have any questions, please feel free to chat away within Citrix. We will get to those questions at the end of the webinar. We will send out the slides from the presentation after the webinar. We'll send them to actually everybody. And of course, there'll be a link to download the webinar if you'd actually like to see the webinar as well. Whoops, sorry about that. So with that said, I'd like to pass it back over to the Portal team and let them give a little background about Portal and really talk about, again, why migrations fail and potentially provide some of the best practices that they've learned on how to improve your migrations. Michael or Val, take it away.
Great. Thanks, Don. So as Don mentioned, we'll go into some key points. There's many reasons why migrations fail, but we'll go into some of the most common ones that we've seen in our practice of doing them here at Portal. We'll talk about some of the different technical approaches that you can take while doing a migration. Not every migration is the same, so depending on your scenario, you may have a different approach of how you might go about doing that. And then some things to consider, additional items around gaining buy-in and how you can make sure that your migration will be a success. So quickly, before we get started, I'll go into a little bit about Portal Solutions. Portal Solutions is a SharePoint consultancy. We've been around since 2002, before SharePoint was even called SharePoint, I believe. The company has done over 200 SharePoint implementations. As I said earlier, many of those involve migration in some components, so we have quite a bit of experience and knowledge in the area. We have 4 key service areas that we work in. Those are in strategy and planning, which is a lot of the topic of this webinar, kind of how do you plan, how do you make sure you have a successful project and a successful migration. We have a branding and UX department. They focus mainly on SharePoint design and UI and usability. They have lots of SharePoint experience, so they can deal with some of the different idiosyncrasies of the product and things that make it unique. We have a design and implementation practice, so that's where we actually work with clients to either create a new SharePoint intranet, extranet, or public-facing site, or help to migrate them to a new version or create updates and enhancements. And then lastly, we've got user adoption and change management. So once your solution is rolled out and as part of putting that solution together, adoption is very key to what we do, and we find it to be a great area of growth and an area where you can really be sure you're getting the most out of your investment. A couple other things. We've been 3 times selected for the Microsoft SharePoint Early Adopter Program, so we tend to get access to SharePoint about a year. The first binary is about a year before it's released out to the public, so we can kind of figure out some of the ins and outs of those products before we actually work with our clients. And we have 2 locations that we focus on, DC and Boston, so our footprint is really from the Northeast all the way to the Mid-Atlantic, though we do projects with companies all over the country. So that's a little bit about Portal. The next slide we'll go into is really kicking it off on why migrations fail. We did base this off of a study that took place in 2007 of global 2,000 companies. In the survey, what they found were that 64% of migrations missed their deadline and 37% were over budget. I was a little skeptical that 64% were over budget and only, or 64% missed the deadline and only 37% were over budget. I have a feeling some of that was maybe underreported by the survey responses, because generally when things are behind schedule, they tend to go over budget as well. But those are the numbers that they found. The big thing that we believe at Portal Solutions, and I think most people do as well, is that time and budget aren't everything. We highly value usability of a solution. At the end of the day, if your clients or your users are not using that solution, we consider that a failure as well. So that doesn't even show up here in the numbers, but that if a project is put out, everything's on budget, on time, nobody uses it, that one should be a failure as well. So during the webinar, we'll cover both usability and adoption as well, because that's really important to having a successful project. And I believe, Don, as well, you've got some things you'll show that can really help with adoption in the concept searching project and how that can fit to make sure you're a success.
Yeah, Mike, I think that would actually be called the software product concept searching. And really, I should say concept classifier and taxonomy workflow, but I always appreciate the chance to speak there.
Okay, so we'll move on to the next item here, which is why migration projects fail. We did identify 4 key areas. These aren't the only reasons that migrations have an issue, but these are some of the key areas we've seen. The first one is failure to fully scope the effort. With all projects, you want to be sure that you truly understand the scope of what you're doing, what you're trying to build. With content migrations, there's some key things to consider. Often there's more content exists than people really understand. Content can live in multiple locations. It can be in legacy file systems, it can be in file shares, it can be in third-party systems like Dropbox and these things that are coming out that people begin to use. And it also many times just lives on people's hard drives. And you've got to find a way to get all of that content and be sure you understand everything that's there, because the more content you've got to migrate, the more you've got to think about. Many times also a migration is considered part of a larger project. You might just say, oh, we'll add 2 more weeks to do this migration and it'll be taken care of. We really encourage people to consider migration as a full-blown work stream as part of your project, and it should really be baked in throughout the whole effort of creating a new intranet or a new extranet or whatever it is you're looking to do. And then the last thing a lot of people forget about is things around functionality. A lot of times your content is tied into a legacy system. You might have workflows, you might have alerts, you might have security, dynamic different ways you display that content, and that all is just as important as the content itself. So when you're looking through all this, those are all things to consider as you scope your effort. The next area that a lot of times people fail to do is to get buy-in from stakeholders. Migrations impact many people, lots of times everyone in your organization who's using your content management system. If they're not sold on how it's going to work, how it can benefit them, they're not going to participate. If no one really reviews the content, approves the content, makes sure that what's being migrated is the correct content, you're not going to have a success, and this is going to be a limited value to people that use the site. So we'll dive deeper into that topic, and that's exactly what concept searching can offer around helping to provide extra value there. The next area that causes a lot of issues with migration projects is that your content isn't cleaned or it's not enhanced. If you just pick up and drop your content into a new system, you could have some issues with that legacy content. It could be multiple copies of content. There could be things that are out of date, things that are no longer relevant to the company. Sometimes things are just basically kind of an out of control mess. And if you just migrate that and put it in the new system, you're going to end up with the exact same problems you had before. So we want to prevent from just migrating exactly what you have. You should actually go through the content, clean it, make sure what you have is valuable to the company, and that you've enhanced that content. There's ways to tag it and make things work so that it can be more findable in the future.
Yeah, and Mike, that's really what we see our solution as. It's one of the pieces that solves that problem. And again, from a cleaning perspective, it could be something as simple as removing credit card numbers or social security numbers. And I don't mean actually removing the numbers, but removing the content that contains those numbers. Or it could be something as simple as getting rid of duplicate content.
Right.
But again, if you have a dirty garage and you go buy a bigger house and a bigger garage and you don't take time to clean it, all you really end up with is a bigger house and a bigger, dirtier garage. And again, that's what our solution solves out of the box. With that said, I'll pass it back to you.
Yeah, perfect. It's a great point. And then the last item is around the failure to budget for all activities. Again, this is similarly related to scope and making sure that you understand everything that you're going to move across. But there are some things with the process that we'll go into. You should really plan to do plan to do a proof of concept before you start your migration, and then actually plan to do mock migrations and iteratively attempt to migrate your content. So you want to be sure if you just move everything across, let your end users into the end user product, or let them into the product and start looking at their content, you're going to get a lot of issues. Your help desk is going to be getting calls left and right because things weren't planned and QA'd correctly. And then the last bit is also around that functionality component I mentioned. If there are workflows, if there's security, things like that that need to be considered as part of the budget, and that you may have to actually, it may be a larger effort than you truly understand. So those are the 4 big key reasons we see projects fail. Again, there are others, but these are the 4 areas we're going to focus on during this webinar. So the next slide, how not to be a statistic. Basically, don't do those things that we just talked about in the previous slide. I don't want to make it sound that simple, but these are the 4 areas we'll talk about. Basically, gaining that, making sure you have that full scope, making sure you have buy-in from your organization, that your data is cleaned and enhanced, and that you create that budget. So I'll just jump into each one, and I've got a slide for each to kind of talk about some key components. So as part of the scope, at the beginning of your project while you're planning, you should really take time to audit your content and fully understand where everything is that you want to move. It may be as simple as a single file share with all of your content in the file share. If that's great, you can probably run a few scripts, do some analysis on your server, and see exactly what it is that you have. Many cases in many organizations, things have spiraled, moved out, and expanded where people are storing content in many different systems. You may have a legacy content management or document management system that has content. You may have file shares. You may have hard drives. There's things everywhere that can really cause to do that. The best way to find this content is really to go through and talk to people. Set up meetings with all of your different stakeholders, everyone that works with content and stores documents, which is basically most people in your organization. Get a subset of those folks and really talk to them and try to find out how they're storing content now and how you can move that and how you can get it over to your new system. The next item that's very important is around creating a proof of concept. Every migration, like I said, is different. You have different systems, and it is very, very worth your time to do this type of a proof of concept. We have a lot of clients that come to us, and Val, you can probably vouch for this. They say, here's our system. How long is it going to take you to migrate this content? And the answer every time is, let's do a small proof of concept and see what you have, look across everything that you've got, and really understand what it is we're going to do and test the approach. Usually they say, okay, well, we'll do a proof of concept, but how much is it going to cost? Or how long is it going to take? And every time the answer is we do just need to do the proof of concept. So they can't point out how important it is to actually do that and make sure you really understand your approach and are sure that it's going to work for you. I mentioned this before as well, but that you need to identify any customizations and requirements. Most of the time this is around workflow, and it's around custom security permissions, and it's around alerts. So there may be legacy systems that have alerts set up and those types of things. SharePoint can do all of that generally out of the box. There are some products that can help with that as well. But it's a matter of making sure you understand everything you have to do, because that that configuration and setup of those types of things does take some time. And as I said before, plan for the multiple iterations and mock migrations. Depending on how large your company is and how large your organization is, it could range from just needing 2 migrations to needing several. You may also break that content across different portions and do subsets and actually do kind of a phased migration, which we'll get into when we talk about the process. But when you do that, it just does add time so that you're sure you really understand how long it's going to take to do this stuff. So that's where we are with scope. The next area we'll talk around is around buy-in. Content owners are needed to, at a minimum, review and QA your content. In some cases, depending on the site and the way things are set up, you may have them go through every single document, review the document, and decide what are the tags for the metadata. Do I actually want to keep this document, or do I want to remove it? Concept searching, we're going to go into some ways to actually streamline that and make that a lot faster, which we've used and had a lot of success. But at the end of the day, somebody needs to QA that and make sure what we're doing is correct and the rules that we've set up actually make sense for that particular business group. So getting the buy-in is very, very critical to making sure everyone's involved in the process. We found the best approach is to go both from the top and get the executive buy-in, which is usually not too difficult to do, depending on how things are set up at your organization, but then also go down and get that grassroots involvement and excitement from people within the company. And so we'll talk a bit about that, but generally you can do a roadshow or a quick presentation of what the migration is, what's in it for your stakeholders, and what is expected and what's going to be needed from them. And it really, really helps things move a lot more smoothly in the process. So that's really it around buy-in. We're going to dig in on a few more slides later to really give you some more information about how you can do that. The next area is around data cleansing. Cleansing and cleaning up your data and enhancing it. The most basic approach is, like I said, to create those migration sheets. Once you have buy-in from your content owners, you can have them fill out these migration sheets and use that to kind of drive the migration and how things will move. Again, Donald showed some demos on how we can speed that up. The automated approaches are great, but they are not everything. It's important that you can automate and streamline the process, but unless someone is there to actually review what you're doing and making sure that the rules you set up with your automated process are correct, making sure that the content's landing in the same organization or the same area of the site that it should be. You don't want your financial documents landing in HR where everyone can see them. That kind of thing, you really have to QA and be sure things are working correctly. So that really requires a human being at some point to go in and make sure things are working correctly. So that's where we are with the cleansing. And then budgeting. Plan time and plan budget for an iterative process. Generally, I see 3 migrations, a proof of concept, and then 2 migrations of iterations of getting content out there, allowing your stakeholders to go out, QA it, point out anything that's an issue, and then address those issues and rerun your migration process. So that does take time, and it does need to be accounted for in your project. Don't estimate the time for that testing and that QA. You know, your stakeholders, your content people are going to be busy. They have full-time jobs. So you want to be realistic about how long that's going to take and how much of your time that's going to take to guide them through the process. Plan for using tools. They can really save time. The tool that we're going to show you guys today and talk about today can really save time, but you need to start those conversations with the vendors early to be sure that you have that budget and really plan for that tool to be used and be part of your project. A lot of the companies, and we can help with this as well, is help come up with a ROI analysis on your tools. A lot of times they always pay for themselves if you're going to use them properly. We have several models that we use. I'm sure Concept Searching has a few as well that they can use to kind of help you figure out how much you can actually look to save if you use this tool. And then the last item I had mentioned earlier as well is around considering a separate project or work stream for your content migration. Like I said, it's not something you just bolt on to the end of an intranet build-out or a document management system build-out. It really needs to be thought about the entire way through. Obviously, there's dependencies that you can't start migrating until your system is up and running, but a lot of that legwork, a lot of the planning, doing the roadshow, doing the buy-in, doing your proof of concept, all that stuff can be done up front, and it really does require a separate set of people to manage and move content across. So those are the 4 key areas and some just really good tips around what you can do to make sure your migration is a success. One of the things we get asked a lot is how we can obtain buy-in. All of those other items I pointed out become a lot easier if people from all levels of your organization are invested, are working hard, and are working to help you make sure this is a success. Because at the end of the day, it is for them and it's going to be a value add. We just need to make sure that the people that are using the system really understand everything they get out of it. So, like I said, buy-in is needed from everyone, from executive level management, line of business management, information technology, obviously, as they will most likely be involved in a lot of these different tasks and need to see the value there, and then most importantly, the end users and the content owners. So there are some tips for what you can do to make sure that you're obtaining buy-in and things are going well. The easiest is really just to sell this migration as an improvement. There's going to be enhanced functionality and things that people have, or things that people will gain by using the new system and with the migrated content. If you use a tool like Concept Searching, content is going to be much more findable. The site will be much more usable. If you actually, which we'll talk about in a second here, take it as an opportunity to rework your IA and information architecture and rework your taxonomy, the site can become so much more usable and the content is so much more easier to find. Users will be happier, and from an executive level, you'd have increased adoption. IT really appreciates increased adoption, really understanding the value that they're bringing to everyone else in the company. So one thing that we recommend is to create a roadshow spreadsheet or a roadshow presentation. And you can meet with different stakeholders as you're prepping to do this project and really pointing out different things that they will gain. And those different areas I talked about are really things that different stakeholders in your organization can benefit from. So here are some ideas, some different things you can do to pair your migration and make it actually a value add for your end users. So one is around your information architecture. As Don was pointing out, just grabbing content, dropping it in, and leaving it as is not really going to add a lot of value. You may be able to add some features like checking in and checking out and version control, but at the end of the day, that really doesn't help users find your content. So take this as an opportunity to remap your information architecture. You can conduct taxonomy workshops to really define how is content defined within your company, how is it described and categorized, and then map those documents as part of that mapping exercise to your new information architecture. I know there are, I'm just mentioning this here, I believe Concept Searching has a couple webinars that are strictly just about information architecture and how you can actually create a great taxonomy for your company. And I really encourage everybody to check those out as well, because that is really the biggest value you're going to get is tagging content and reorganizing it in a way where users can find it. Secondly, a big thing that users can get out of the a migration is improved search, improved findability. When that metadata is added to documents, when documents are tagged properly, they end up showing in search refiners in SharePoint out of the box with very, very little configuration. So users can start clicking down into different categories similar to like your Amazon search if you're looking for a television. You wanted to know the size of the you wanted to drill down to the size of the television, or want a Toshiba or a Samsung or something like that. Those types of things begin to appear automatically in SharePoint as long as you have this search and this tagging and this type of infrastructure set up. And then lastly, you can use it to take care of governance, which is a really big topic these days. Adding retention rules to your organization, to different areas, enforcing quotas for different sites, version control and version history, and then content expiration. A lot of times people find content from 8, 10 years ago, 15 years ago on their file shares, and this stuff all has to be gone through. SharePoint, you can actually post-migration set up some things to ensure that content is reviewed periodically and doesn't just sit there and stagnate. So those are some ideas for buy-in. Like I said, the best thing is really to create a roadshow, go through to different areas of your organization and really sell the migration as a benefit for these different areas. Okay. So the last area I'll cover, and then Val will take a look at some different technical approaches to migration, is just the general process you can expect to follow. We start all of our projects with a discovery phase. At that point, we will identify the business case and the return on investment. There is also a webinar I know that they offer from Concept Searching around calculating and creating an ROI to really get the project off the ground. I listened to that one, it was really great, so I encourage everybody to check that out. Work with your end-based users to create user stories and test scripts. So this is really around requirements gathering, ensuring that there is the functionality behind just getting the content across to the new system. So you can define your user stories or your requirements in whatever way you find best, but it's very important to document exactly what it is you're going to deliver for your end users. You can inventory your source content in all of your systems, like I talked about earlier. Content can live in many different places, so you really need to understand what it is you're trying to move. And then find those owners, convince them that they need to be a part of this migration and really assist in making sure their content gets in the way that they want it. Find those folks and get the buy-in from them. I also noted here, at that point during discovery, you can design your new information architecture and taxonomy, which is a whole nother thing, whole nother webinar that you could go into talking about that activity. And then lastly, determining your migration approach, which Val will go into to talk about some of those different areas. So once you've done your discovery phase, we always recommend a proof of concept. Build out your environment, deploy all the customizations that you have that have been created, anything that you expect, any configuration in SharePoint for workflows, for alerts, security, that kind of thing. Do all of that for one subset of your content. That would be a pretty good example of what your content may be. So pick a subset, deploy these customizations, and then execute the migration per your plan. Then spend some time going through and identify all of the issues, come up with a mitigation plan, and at that point, once you have the idea of what it's going to take and what issues there are, you can begin to address those and fix it. The next slide, or the next point, would be around the iterative mock migrations. After you've done your proof of concept, you can update your project plan and really go through a set of iterative migrations. I like to do a phased rollout, identifying different groups that need to have their content moved and doing them in succession. So you may have HR and finance go first, you may have sales go next, and then have project delivery or something like that go at the final area. So kind of phasing that out and making sure that your content is done in an iterative approach. Each subset of the content you want to look at, move that across, check your test scripts, get the content owners to review that content and make sure they're satisfied, continue to do your iterations, and then move on to the next once they've got everything, once they've approved and signed off. And then lastly, depending on how you might do this, you could do a full-blown go-live deployment, setting your legacy content to read-only, performing all of that migration to plan, and then bringing it live. And so that would be generally the approach is doing iterative migrations and then cutting over to go live. Okay. And so then lastly, we add an optimized step, which is really end user support and adoption activities. There are different things you can do to make sure users are actually using your site, feel comfortable with it. We do a lot of lunch and learns, a lot of brown bags, a lot of things like that where people can learn about different features of the system and different ways they can work with the site. Then you can also just do your standard support type things around bug fixing, enhancements, site monitoring, and search enhancements. So really, this is the general migration process that we follow. We tend to tailor it for every company or organization we work with, but this is what we found to be pretty successful over the past 10, 12 years doing this type of work. Okay, so with that, I will hand it over to Val. We'll talk to you guys a little bit about migration approaches and different things to consider.
Thank you, Mike. And just to set the record straight on that initial introduction, the first version of SharePoint, that is the one I'm thinking about, that was called 2001, was called SharePoint. All right, so
I thought it was called something else until.
Yeah, the two different product names from two different Microsoft teams, but fundamentally marketing put them under the same umbrella. When it comes to figuring out what specific approach you will use to migrate your content, you have a number of options. Basically, you can use the approach that Microsoft themselves offers with the product, mostly for version to version of SharePoint upgrades, involving basically just the SharePoint content itself. There are also a number of available third-party products out there that can handle the task of moving over the content for you into mostly what is under that second option, mostly a new shell of the installation or a new portal wherein the content gets copied out. That's obviously that new version is on the latest upgraded, most recently available version of the SharePoint product. And third, just for fairness of the balance of presentation, is the manual migration that I'll also cover in some caveats. Really, the choice between what you use or how you upgrade depends on two large factors. First factor is how much content you're migrating and whether all of that content has to be migrated at once with the cutover, or you can take your time doing some staged migrations and staged rollout of content if that's also, if your original content supports it, supports this process to be done this way. That's really the first factor. And the second factor is all about how different your source and the destination look like. That is basically if you're just maybe migrating over just one SharePoint document management system over to the most recent version of SharePoint without changing much, maybe without even adding any additional content types, etc. That's a fairly simple case where the source information architecture is fairly close to the destination. On the other hand, you might have some new additional sources, such as maybe adding additional third-party document management systems that are scheduled to be retired, to be migrated to SharePoint, maybe some file systems, and you're also doing some content reorganization, leaving some content behind. That obviously does create a number of challenges in aligning the old way you were organizing or not organizing your content to how it hopefully will be organized on your new SharePoint installation. So those two factors basically play across the next three slides in different combinations. And the next approach we'll take a look at will actually be the Microsoft offered content database migrations, which really, as I mentioned earlier, works when you consider your upgrade process to be predominantly driven by SharePoint content. That is, you already have an existing SharePoint installation that you'd like to upgrade to the most recent version. In this scenario, Microsoft really just gives you the option of taking the databases that SharePoint uses internally, wherein all the content is stored, and upgrading them to the most currently available version, with one caveat that for the folks out there who are still on the MOS Microsoft Office SharePoint Server 2007, there's not a direct upgrade path involving databases that will take you to 2013 SharePoint. You'll actually have to make a stop at 2010 and then upgrade from there. But other than that, basically, this process is a fairly efficient process in terms of the labor that is spent per given documents to upgrade all of your documents. This process, as I mentioned earlier, does not really require you to create anything new. You can basically reuse your existing IA investments. Whether it's a good or a bad thing depends on what you currently have. That process also typically lends itself to migrations that are mostly treated as a cutover migration. That is, you have sizable enough but not too big of a content body wherein you can execute your upgrades over maybe a 48, maybe slightly longer hour window, in which case you really can just treat this as end of a work week. We basically kick off a migration project, and when our employees return on Monday, they interface with a new upgraded system. You obviously also have the option of treating this as a staged upgrade, and the rollout just making the whole process a bit more complicated. And given the fact that you're dealing with databases, you really don't have a lot of granularity in treating your individual document libraries or individual documents, for that sake, as separate stages of the migration. Just need to correct myself. The acronym of IA that I used just earlier in my presentation was referring to information architecture. That just loosely identifies your approach to how you set up the navigation on your site, how you categorize your content. So that basically just involves a number of these concepts in terms of basically how your information is presently organized for browsing and content categorization. The second axis that we look into in terms of the migration options is using a third-party tool. Usually when you take this approach in situations where you have a lot of disparate content repositories you're trying to migrate from, such as not just SharePoint, but also some third-party DMSs, file systems, etc. And also this is incidentally the approach that allows you to treat the whole process of the migration and the cutover in a much easier sense, because you do have the option of basically more granular control over what content is migrated at what time, thus giving you more flexibility in switching over portions of your system to the new installation, or even doing things such as your people authoring on your existing 2007 DMS, that's the document management system, while that content is being shadow copied into your 2013 installation up until such time that everybody is ready to do the final cutover. So there are a number of vendors out there that support this paradigm, and overall this is an area that also works out very well for situations where your existing SharePoint installation has been highly customized. The reason for that is obviously if you're doing a content database upgrade, you have to upgrade everything. That's not just the content, but also any of the prior customizations that may have been deployed, Bamboo web parts, coursework web parts, etc. All of that has to be carried forward or removed from the from the source system prior to the upgrade actually taking place. And the last option we take a look at is manual migration. Is really just, as I mentioned earlier, presented to you for the fairness sake. It really only works out in situations where you have very little amount of content to migrate, or where you have a lot of patience. But even in that situation, treating a typical situation where, let's say, a department will want to migrate from a file share into a newly set up SharePoint site, maybe on SharePoint Online, just dealing with things like renaming files to drop ampersands because there are forbidden characters in the SharePoint file system, can drive you crazy. So even in that case, there are, I'm happy to let you know that there are a number of vendor tools out there that are basically fairly accessible, or even in the free realm, for small amounts of content to be migrated. So in that case, you just want to basically treat your situation as the second situation presented earlier. Those are the general options. Sometimes you use one approach exclusively. Sometimes it's a mix of approaches. Maybe you do just an existing Moss farm upgrade to 2010 and 13, and then you follow it up with some additional content migration from an open text system later in the subsequent phase, but generally these are the technical options available to you. And with that, I'll hand over the flow to Don.
Thanks, Val. Okay, so I am going to actually be working with Mike and Val. And so on the slides here, what I'm going to outline to everybody is the first 5 slides are our traditional slides. You've probably all seen these slides numerous times, especially if you've attended any of our webinars. But after that, there should be another 5 to 6 what I will call high-value slides, new slides aligned with migration. And then after that, we're going to try and do a quick little demo to show a couple pieces that we've talked about today that we think are actually most relevant for you. And of course, these will be things that our solution, Concept Classifier, does out of the box. And really from the migration component, that specific product is called Taxonomy Workflow. It does require Concept Classifier though. And so again, we will show that, or at least talk about it and show it during the demonstration. So when we talk about migration, we look at it, believe it or not, of course, as usual, as a tagging problem. And again, if we can't tag our content consistent, then we really don't know what to do with it, i.e., without consistency, we can't align it with governance. Without aligning it for governance, we don't know if we should migrate the content out of the system, migrate it to your records repository, or delete it altogether. And so, again, as usual, everything to concept searching is a tagging problem. Next slide, please. And these will take just a second or two to update. But, and again, from our perspective, and again, to reconfirm, again, these are the same 5 slides that we traditionally use. The problem with tagging is if you're doing it manually, it's going to lead to failure. And that's just because it's an inconsistent process. And really the true problem is just that it's subjective. And that's because if I give a document to tag to Michael, and I give that same document to Val, from the numerous focus groups we've done, we know that those two will tag it differently. So one will tag to migrate it, and one will tag to delete it. Well, that's really not the problem. The real problem is if I give that document to Val in the morning and I ask him to tag it, he'll tag it for migration. When I give him that same document at the end of the day, he'll be like, no, we don't want to archive that. We want to delete it. And so the true problem with tagging is that it's subjective from the end user's perspective. And so what we want to do is automate that entire process. And not only will that allow us to apply metadata for improved search, but as I've mentioned, can align with records management policies and then, of course, migration. Next slide, please. And so the way we do this is we work with your content. When we work with your content, what we actually do is index all of your content. I'm going to actually show a couple things that I never show on our traditional demos today. But when we do that, what we do is build out what we call a multi-word concept index. And the goal of that is to get a thorough understanding of that content. And when we do that, it allows us to extract the concept. So the example, traditional example that we use, if I said the word triple, we could be talking about baseball. If I talk about heart, we could be talking about love. And if I talk about bypass, we could be talking about freeway. But if I said triple heart bypass, we all know that we're talking about open heart surgery. Well, our solution allows us to extract out that concept without doing anything. And then because we understand that concept, as you'll see, we're going to use that to underpin everything that we build out as it relates to the concept searching stack. And again, the product that will do the migration is called Taxonomy Workflow, but it requires Concept Classifier and Taxonomy Manager. Next slide, please. So we're talking about migration today, but again, from our perspective, everything rolls back to metadata. And so from a metadata perspective, we've developed the solution stack. And we believe that the sum of the parts is greater than the whole because that solution stack allows us to provide an enterprise metadata framework across the organization. So not only can we use it to migrate content, which obviously is a standard process, but migrate content so that we can align it with your legal e-discovery goals, or migrate a document in alignment with your FDA requirements, or whatever your specific records management requirements that are aligned with your Fortune 2000 company. And again, the way we do that is what we call the Smart Content Framework, which is our product suite, which allows us to apply metadata in alignment with your specific metadata policy. Next slide, please. Now, our typical approach, which also aligns with the approach that Val and Mike talked about, is to model and validate the content. And so we're going to kind of show a couple pieces of that we traditionally don't show today. And then once we've modeled and validate, so then go ahead and begin the auto-tagging process. And if you remember, Mike and Val both talked about doing a POC of some type to ensure that what you're going to do will actually be successful. Well, that really is what our step one model and validate process is all about. We want to make sure that what we're going to do, if we're going to apply metadata, that it's the right metadata. And what I always tell people is when you're applying the metadata, at a minimum, if you're consistent, even if you're wrong, it's okay because you're consistently wrong. With our solution, you can go back, fix that metadata issue, and when you fix that issue, the nice thing is you fix it consistently across the enterprise, which means it's fixed correctly. And so again, as long as you're being consistent across the enterprise, it's okay to be wrong because that means you can go back and fix it consistently right when you go back and make your changes and updates. That metadata, once we actually begin the tagging process, can be used to improve findability, align with business processes, and again, a typical business process might be just to migrate the content. Also to remove duplicates and or sensitive information, align with records management policies, and ultimately delete and manage as part of the whole entire life cycle. Next slide, please. So Val talked about 3 different approaches. We're not going to try and be the enterprise migration expert. Again, what we see ourselves as a framework to ensure that when you begin that migration process, that you've deduped your content, that you remove your sensitive information, and the content that you want to migrate is actually the content that needs to be moved from point A to point B. Next slide, please. On the slides that we're looking at as well, these are, again, the new slides that we were talking about. And again, these are great slides to leverage within your company to get enterprise buy-in. So while we'll be talking about some of the points, again, we're going to mail the deck out to everybody, and please feel free to use these when you're actually presenting to your senior leadership committees about whether you should actually take action and do a migration project or not. Again, the name of this session was why 85% of data migration projects fail. And I believe that Val and Mike have outlined some of the critical steps that will ensure that you don't fail. But I do believe that the critical steps are ensuring that you have senior buy-in, ensuring that you're setting a proper budget, and then taking the time to actually clean your content before you actually migrate it from, again, point A to point B. Next slide, please. Again, another nice statistical slide. Again, as a metadata expert and as metadata having to align with different specifications, this is a very nice statistic from the Compliance Governance and Oversight Council. And really, just highlighting again the risks that are associated in aligning metadata with ultimately your migration process. You know, why are we keeping content around? Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I was just going to point out something that really jumps out at me on this slide is that only 25% of content actually has current business value. And the fact that you could really decrease the level of complexity and the amount of migration that you actually have to do by taking advantage of something like Content Classifier and the different products you offer to actually only bring across items that are valuable. I think that's the big key that people can share.
Couldn't agree with you more, Mike. And again, what we're going to show when we highlight the demo today is we're actually going to show one of the pieces, again, that we usually don't show, that shows our dedupe capabilities. So not even talking about the stale content and the old content, but just what about the content that we have 10 copies of it, right? Why are we keeping that content around? Well, it's just our inner nature. But again, we'll show that in just a few. Next slide, please. So again, we call it an intelligent migration approach, but really what we're talking about is the smart content framework. And again, by leveraging the smart content framework, it allows us to validate and model the content before we're ever going to take action on it. So again, once we have insight into the content, we can determine what kind of content we want to move, and then where we should actually move it to. Again, with our solution, once we've actually confirmed that the model is actually successful, it will automate the process, and content can be moved from point A to point B. Next slide, please. So we have been highlighting SharePoint. The one other component that we want to add here, when we talk about our components, taxonomy workflow is actually aligned very tightly with SharePoint. But more importantly, as a framework, it means that not only can we support SharePoint, but that we can also support file shares. And pragmatically speaking, really any other content repository that we're working with. Now, Val highlighted a couple different things that are very relevant here. And that is, if you have a completely different structure and you're trying to map it into SharePoint, or from SharePoint to a completely different structure, there is most definitely going to be IA work that will need to be done. But with our solution, Taxonomy Workflow, it's built as a template to allow you to easily migrate different types of content from different types of sources from point A to point B. Not to say that there won't be some source that we don't work with, but so far, pragmatically speaking, just about every source that somebody has pointed us towards and said, hey, can you migrate this kind of content for us from here into SharePoint, we've actually been able to do it. And so again, as the complexity goes up, it does mean that you'll require more work and more setup and more consulting services from Portal Solutions as they're doing that migration, leveraging Taxonomy Workflow. But again, it also means that you will be able to do it. So this is another one of those process slides, again, really talking about the ability to model content, validate that the content that we actually want to move is the right content to move, and then moving that content from point A to point B. Validating these different types of steps just ensures that once you actually do begin the entire process, that the content itself actually works the way that you want it to work. Next step, please. Next slide, please. So ultimately here, when we're talking about content and we're talking about migration, really we're trying to align it with our overall governance policies. So as we begin to migrate the content, it's not that we just want to migrate the content, it's that we want to cleanse and or extend the content as well. By extend, I mean apply different governance policies that most likely weren't applied to the content to begin with. We want to do it in an automated fashion. By doing it in an automated fashion, it ensures consistency and allows us to not only automate the process, but also to potentially dedupe the content as well as remove sensitive information. With that said, next slide, please. I keep thinking we're going to the demo slide, Michael. So I thought we were there right here. But so again, just to talk about the product one more time. No, it's okay. The Smart Content Framework is built on a service-oriented architecture, which means that it's web service enabled, and again, that's what allows us to work with all the other different platforms that we talked about if we're talking about a migration project. So again, out of the box, SharePoint to SharePoint, complete no-brainer. But more importantly, if you're working with another platform, i.e. a file share, i.e. a database, i.e. another solution, with the service-based product, it makes it very easy to have a template to allow us to integrate into those other products. And with that said, now I'm going to ask you, Michael, to go ahead and turn over the session to me, and I'll do a quick demonstration.
All right, it should be heading over your way in a second here.
Yep.
While that's loading up, I did notice there was a question out there on what I had meant when I mentioned QA earlier. That's quality assurance, which was meant for testing. So a lot of the reason you need that stakeholder buy-in is to do the testing. So just wanted to point that out.
Hey, and so I just, I'm on a SharePoint site, and I'm actually uploading a document. Can you actually see that I'm uploading that document right now?
I can.
Excellent. So this is the same demo that we've showed, again, numerous times. We're just going to show one or two quick little pieces here. Like I said, we're going to highlight a couple of different things today that we usually do a little bit differently. And so here we can see the document getting uploaded. And what we should see is the metadata, again, has automatically been applied. And then ultimately what's going to happen, just like it has every other demo that we've done, is that document is going to be moved from the shared documents folder to the FOU folder. And so what we'll see here is that we've uploaded that document. Here we can see the metadata that's been applied to the document. And in this instance, again, the workflow will ultimately take this document to the FOU folder in just a moment as soon as the pending tag does the migration of the document.
So Don,
what everybody always wants to know.
I just had a quick question for you. So all of that content then, all of that tagging is done by analyzing the content of the document and then applying the tag?
That is correct. And so again, rather than the end user subjectively selecting the tags and hoping that they've actually migrated the document here to the FOU folder, what we did is we read it, we applied those 8 to 10 tags, and then we're going to migrate that document to this folder right here.
Fantastic.
But what I wanted to show is how we actually do that. And so here we see a taxonomy that we've created. We see that we have some different fake retention codes. We see some semantic policies. Generally speaking, we usually separate this out so that we have we would have just a records management taxonomy or a semantic taxonomy. But just to highlight things and get things done a little bit quicker today, I merged the two together. But in this demo today, what I wanted to show is, again, not only are we applying the meta tag to make it semantically more findable, aligned with governance, but that we can actually get a true understanding of what the content looks like. And so here, we've actually went to the stats page. And so what you see here is that we can actually highlight to the end user how much content that we're working with that might actually be duplicated. And so obviously, if we have a bunch of content and we're actually duplicating that content, again, we're just cluttering up our bright new shiny SharePoint 2013 portal or Office 365. And rather than do that, again here we can highlight that document. And so not only could we highlight that it is a duplicate page, we could actually tag it as such, and then we could actually move it to a different location if, again, that was the strategy or goal of what we're doing. Again, usually we don't talk about this. Usually we just focus on the migration, but because we've actually shown that so many times in so many other demos, I just thought it might be nice to see some of the other values that we can work with. Okay, and then the one other thing that we wanted to show today is taxonomy workflow. And so we were talking about tagging the content. And when we tag the content, the way that works is that we score a document. If the document scores above a certain threshold, in this instance, the threshold is above 50, then we would apply the specific tag that we're working with. Same with workflow. And so we were looking at that FOUO tag. So again, if it had the term FOUO on it, or if it had the term for official use only, we would apply the tag. We would score the document as having a score of at least 50, and then we would apply the meta tag FOUO. Well, obviously that is only going to apply to metadata. That's not actually going to move the document from point A to point B. The way we would do that is with our tool, Workflow Manager, which allows us to move a document from point A to point B. That is set up here with all these different little components that you see here on the left-hand side. The Workflow plugin is what allows us to actually work with all the different repositories. So like I said, it could be working with a file share, it could be working with a database, it could be working with another records management solution. But the Workflow plugin is what allows us to grab a document, apply the metadata, move the document into SharePoint or to another location such as a file share or to a delete repository, and again, in a completely automated fashion. Because we've reached the end of our time today, what we are going to suggest is that if you would like to see an actual build-out and setup of Workflow Manager and how we can actually migrate a document from point A to point B in your environment, which again is ultimately the theme of this webinar, please send a note to myself, Mike, or Val, and we'll actually walk through our solution and show you how we can automate the process of migrating content in your environment, but more importantly, providing a hybrid approach. Because again, when you're working with this type of content, it's not only that you want to migrate the content, but really you have to align it with all of your overall governance policies. And so we need to figure out what kind of content needs to be moved, what kind of content does not get moved, and ultimately ensure that the migration project is a success, and not only a success, but on time, and in a perfect world, under budget. With that said, I'd like to thank my colleagues, Mike and Val. I was going to say, Nicola, if you could pass control back to Mike, because when I reduced my little file sharing screen, it actually reduced my thank you very much. That's what I was looking for. And so again, this is Don Miller saying thank you, everyone. We appreciate your time. And again, if you'd like to actually see taxonomy workflow in action in your environment because you have a migration project, please feel free to reach out to myself, Val, or Mike, and we'll set up a custom personalized live meeting just for you. Any other comments that you'd like to throw in there, Val or Mike?
Nothing from my side. I just wanted to thank everybody for the time, and that was a great demo, Don. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, Val. Thank you, Mike. We look forward to seeing everybody on our next session, and have a wonderful rest of your day.